I became an entrepreneur because...
I wanted to be rich and famous.
How honest of you. The book that best reflects my philosophy as a founder is...
The Infinite Game.
Oh, okay. I will definitely read it, by the way. I love Simon Sinek. My mission in life is...
To contribute both to those close to myself and in a more broader circle as well.
I'd like to change.
I'm not sure I want to switch anything, 180 degrees. I like to change maybe my own ability to collaborate better with people who has different styles than me. Does it make sense?
It makes sense, at least to me. I'm
don't
struggling
want to
with
be.
a similar
It's
problem.
not a very blitz, but I don't want to just work well with people who are very similar to me and like clones of myself. I want to get along better and be more efficient for both ways, for both sides, with people who are very different than me.
And the last question is actually a question that I ask to all of our guests, because somehow I believe it, reflects the mindset of a certain type of people that we're inviting to the Recursive podcast.
Let me see if I'm passing the test.
What do you want to be remembered for?
My sparkle to make things better.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to the next series of the Recursive podcast. My name is Irina. I'm today's host, and I'm very pleased to welcome our guest. I'm not sure how to introduce him. I would say a serial entrepreneur. But let me ask you first, what is your main vocation? You founded Imagga, your first startup. You founded Kelvin Health, which is now making the news all around it because you made like a very important discovery. You're teaching at the university. I know from a fact that, actually from the other Georgi, that you're practicing quite actively also jiu-jitsu. What is your vocation?
Well, I'm a man of many hats, but at the same time, I think entrepreneurship in general is the main occupation that I have in every aspect of my life, I can say so. So my current work involvement is mostly in Kelvin Health. This is a spin-off startup company from Imagga. So actually both companies are related. And I'm not always saying myself being a serial entrepreneur because I'm typically building things on top of each other. So I'm not starting multiple things that have nothing in common. And Kelvin Health is our newest baby, and it's a very impactful application of image recognition technology. That's why I'm currently putting about 80% of my work effort into it, and about 20% in the mother company of Imagga.
Okay. So in a way, this is also recursive to you.
Yeah, it is.
Because you're
definitely
building it on top of it. You said that you're an entrepreneur. What does being an entrepreneur mean to you? When did it actually start?
Yeah, so to me, it means to find problems and think actively about their solutions. And especially if you think that you're the best fitted person to solve a particular problem, I think it's your responsibility to actually act on it. So to me, this is entrepreneurship. There are many definitions of entrepreneurship. One of them is related to the fact that you typically don't have as much resources as you want to have. So part of your job as an entrepreneur is to acquire those resources. I think I'm doing that as well. Of course, there are different types of resources, from monetary to informational to network-based.
What lit the spark for entrepreneurship in you? I mean, you started working on Imagga already at the university, from what I found in the research.
Kind of. Yeah. So the occasion was that I started studying in the master program of technology entrepreneurship in Sofia University. This is the place where I'm teaching right now as well, as part of my, let's call it a hobby or a free time engagement. So this was the catalyst for me to actually perceive myself seriously about entrepreneurship. Even in high school, I was starting some kind of IT projects and I was working on something on my own. And I had some very distant vision how I want to build a product maybe one day out of it. Though I was a very hard wired to computer programming. This was my main passion, and my background is in computer science and computer programming. But I had this, partially at least, this type of product thinking, and I was willing to build products, not just to write code.
So you started working on the Imagga business idea already while bootstrapping it in high school. And at some point you founded also your co-founders. How did you know what kind of skill set do you need to build a company, to build a product? Because I could imagine that, building products back then in time where, not even the word startup was probably known to people. How did you know how to proceed, how to start, how to kick it off?
Well, I'm just this kind of go-getter type of guy. So if I think that I can do something, I just go and do it, and then I learn as I walk, or as I run, or as I fall as well. So it has been an evolutionary process for me, to be honest. At first, I started by myself. Then I added a few more people to the team, which used to be my close friends. Then it didn't work out with them just because of the level of commitment that we had. Maybe as a very young entrepreneur, I couldn't deliver the vision to them as well. But this hasn't been a pity. This has been a learning experience, and we are still good friends with those guys. We didn't broke apart or something. It's as friends. So after some time, I also was working on my own, and then I met a few people. Chris Georgiev, who is currently still, very active part of Imagga 10 years later. And we just share the same type of values. I think that it's very important to have similar type of ambitions and similar type of goals. So we both believe that out of Bulgaria, you can build quality technology business, that it's good not to just work in the area of outsourcing, but also build products on your own. And we stood behind this creed for quite a lot of time. I mean, we didn't decide to take an easy road to generating some, modest amount of cash or revenue or something. We decided we have the capacity to build products that can be useful to a lot of people, or services that can be used to a lot of people, but not in the sense of professional services, in terms of automated services. And we just stood behind that, and we attract more and more people who can be useful in this process, and who enjoy this process. So there's no silver bullet to building a team. I think it's almost in any type of relationship. You just work with people and see how things are going. That's why I typically advise entrepreneurs not to get into formal marriages with their co-founders very early on. It's better to just work on the thing and see how everybody is committing to it and how much it's a mutually enriching process. I mean, both the co-founders can contribute to the product, and the development of the product and the path to building the product itself is enriching them. If that's the case, it's a stable environment and they can survive for a long time.
It's interesting that you're mentioning exactly this topic, because in the previous episode, we were having Eva Gumnishka, and I don't know if you know that, but in the Recursive podcast, we have the recursive question, which is usually asked by the former guest.
That's cool.
She didn't know who is coming next, but her question to the next guest, and this is you, was how do you manage to attract and retain the best talent to your company? And here I see a different aspect of, it's one thing to hire, or to find a co-founder, and another thing to hire people who work for you as employees. So I would like to split the question into two and talk about how do you attract and find and retain the best co-founder to your company, because you were exactly in this position, and in your case, friends weren't obviously a good fit. And how did you proceed doing that afterwards with employees?
So I believe, thank you first for the question to both you and Eva. I can say she's a good long-term friend of mine. When she was starting her business, we were practically her first customer. So it's somehow, how to say this, nostalgic to me.
Oh, nice. That wasn't on purpose, by the way.
Yeah,
I didn't even know that you were working together before. Like, cool.
That's awesome that she's also developing very well right now. So I'm a fan of things that happen naturally, which doesn't mean that you don't need to put effort into happening, into making them happen. So I think that if you have your own set of values and your own creed and your own way of doing things, you attract like-minded people. So most of our current team in both companies, those guys have been attracted always by references. I mean, we have published ads for open positions for various job openings, and even the people who we attracted through those we used to know them to a certain extent from some previous experience, and this hasn't been on purpose. I think that we have, I can say, pretty good visibility in the local startup and entrepreneur ecosystem, and most of the people know what we do, and we make our best effort to communicate what we are fighting for or what we are pushing toward in terms of what we want to achieve. I mean, what's the end goal of the things that we do, and how we communicate those things. I believe that we attract the right type of person to be on board on building something that has some kind of mission, applying technology, being challenging, and being impactful. And if people are aligned with those goals and with those underlying values, we are a good fit. So we are not chasing people. We are attracting people, to say so, or we prefer to be a magnet, not to be a chaser of talent. We never try to attract somebody based on pure salary or something like that. We like missionaries over mercenaries, as trivial as it may sound.
Thank you for mentioning this. And I was actually just about to ask you, because I know that you've been bootstrapping in the beginning of Imagga for, I think, something like 2 years, maybe. I mean, you know best.
Yeah.
And I guess, and these times it's even more difficult to attract people for salary. I mean, I guess that most of the people that started working on the project were out there, working there out of conviction.
Yeah, that's true.
Yeah.
So I think that just Chris and I clicked together because Chris then brought his then business partner into a web development studio, Pavel Andreev. So I think I recognized in Chris and Chris recognized in me the same type of ambitions to build technology startups out of Bulgaria. And then we didn't need to convince each other. Something very specific about startups is that you either love working for them or you don't work for them at all. You don't have a rational reason to work for a startup or to found a startup besides believing in its mission. And I would use a quote by Bogumil Balkansky, Bogi, well known, I guess, as well in the Bulgarian ecosystem. And not only. So he said, a lot of people are asking me, should I pursue a professional career or starting a startup? And he said, I am telling them there are no rational reasons to start a startup. You can make much more money if you climb the corporate ladder the right way. Of course, if you have the skills and the qualities. The only reason to start a startup is to feel that your life will be incomplete if you don't do it. So it's as simple and as natural as that. You start a startup because you feel that if you don't do it, you'll be a lesser man to a certain extent or to a huge extent.
Or a lesser woman.
Yeah, man like a human being.
Lesser human being. Okay. Did you felt it the same way? Was it for you also, the feeling that you would be a lesser person if you don't?
So lesser person is just an idiom in English, and I'm not necessarily using it literally. But my personal motivation when I was bootstrapping Imagga at first, as I said, this coincided with my master degree of technology entrepreneurship. Actually, I started a little bit before that, but it mostly coincided with that in time-wise. So at first, of course, I wanted to make a lot of money and get famous and things like that at 21 or something once. And there's nothing, I think, wrong with that. We always have, I think, our lower and higher aspects of motivation, and they typically might be of the same thing. So I think every young person wants to prove themselves, wants to, to be famous, to be rich, to be recognized, to attract more partners, or I don't know, whatever, anything that's ego driven. Then I realized that this is just the bite, but actually I have a bigger reason to be an entrepreneur, and it is that I want the things that I have as skills, as a mindset that of course is always evolving, to contribute and to make things that are useful to others. And it's funny that you asked this question, and I'm very verbose on it because it's a favorite topic of mine, to be honest. When I do some kind of lectures or presentations about entrepreneurship and motivation behind the entrepreneurship, I use one quote from Steve Jobs, and it resonates very well with me. It's not one of his most popular ones, maybe, but it's that once we realize that everything in the world around us, everything, those mics, the camera, the whole venue, these things have been built by somebody, and somebody has put their effort and their creative thinking and countless hours of work and design and whatever. And you realize that all these things exist only just because somebody who is not necessarily super smarter than you or something has decided to do them and to produce them one way or another. And actually, all of us has the capacity to create things, to create podcasts or to create startup companies. It doesn't matter, but we have the ability to do things and to produce things that are useful to others. And I think that this is something that, I heard like 5-6 years ago. And then I realized that even earlier as later, this has been what clicked between entrepreneurship and me.
It's about creating stuff and giving it an impulse, doing it with others. I mean, tell me about your leadership style. What is really motivating you, and what kind of leader do you also want to be for the people in your organization?
I try typically to lead by example, though it's not always possible. And it's not always right, I think sometimes. We need to recognize that we have our own different work styles. I'm a very hard worker. I'm a very urgent person. I typically don't delay things.
Okay.
This doesn't mean that, I should always enforce this on others at the same time. But I think that I've always tried, and of course this has become more and more conscious through the years, to share the enthusiasm and to share the upsides of entrepreneurship with all people that work together in our teams. So to me, the first and foremost is still what's the mission of the thing that we are building, of the company, of Imagga, of Kelvin Health. Why do we think that the things that we produce are useful to others? I stress very much on that, not just as a sales technique, which is of course important if you want to deliver the value proposition to your customers, but I think that I constantly enforce in a positive way the mission that we are after. And the people who survived and who raised into the structure of the company are those that can recognize the same mission and that are driven by that. So I'm a very mission-driven kind of leader myself.
I mean, you pivoted the idea of Imagga many times over the years, I can guess, and now you have also the spin-off. What is the mission of Imagga? Is it like a one thing? Did it change over time? How do you communicate it also to your organization?
Yeah, well, the funny thing is that with Imagga, we've never had like a clear mission statement that sits on the wall or something like that.
I mean, this is like a must-do. Aren't you reading those business books?
I used to, like 10 years ago, and sometimes I still do. As a matter of fact, I mostly listen to audiobooks right now. Just my lifestyle allows more for that. But, something that I started doing at first when I was handling most of the sales of the company in the very first beginning, I started to invite people to join these calls with me, even if they don't talk at all. So they just hear how I communicate the things that we do with the customers. And I've always very consciously tried, as I just shared, to enforce how much we believe in the benefit of the things that we do. And in the case of Imagga, the benefit, if should be generalized, is how we can automate mundane or dangerous or some other type of unpleasant tasks by using technology and AI. Because from my very first years in high school, when I started being involved into computer programming, what got me excited about it is how you can automate things. So if we can automate things and deliver value that way, or open new business opportunities, whatever the way is, this is in alignment with our mission. Of course, this is very broad, and to a certain extent, this has led to some kind of a spread of focus in Imagga. That's why we started 2 years ago a specific project that's about content moderation, which is filtering out the unpleasant content on the web. and we're getting more and more of it because it's very easy nowadays to create content. It wasn't that easy 10 years ago, but now everybody has a very good digital camera, either separate one or as part of as their mobile devices, and you can create practically anything. You can share various type of garbage, to say so. So we are helping companies to filter this out and to protect the safety of their users. This is a very specific new product, very focused one of Imagga. And our mission there is, of course, to help having a safe web, and at the same time prevent a lot of people from having psychological problems. Because currently, how people moderate content, even in the biggest social media companies, is by employing people who spend like 8 to 10 hours watching reported content, and this is typically disgusting. And I think our generations, we are very visual, and if we see unpleasant things all day, or rude things, or terrific things, or not terrific, sorry, terrible things, your mind got bugged. It got twisted, because you started to perceive that reality is something disgusting. And there are even suicidal cases in those companies that need to handle this content. So as much as we can automate the process and reduce the burden for people who need to do a lot of focus on unpleasant and disturbing visual content, this is in alignment with the mission, especially of this new product of Imagga.
There is actually a theory like that. I remember studying it at the university. I was studying communication science. It's called the scary world syndrome. So, but it's more like a chicken egg problematic. You don't know where is it really coming from. Is it because we watch so many negative and that terrible news that we get scared of the world, especially old people, or is it the other way around? We're more prone to paranoia and fear. This is why we look for content which is confirming our bias.
Well, it might be both ways. It's a deep philosophical question. I believe that fear is necessary to a certain extent for survival, of course, evolutionary. At the same time, I believe that the capacity of the human mind is so much widened when fear is taking the backseat. Because if you are driven by fear, you're basically in a constant congestion of your mind. And I believe it's important to have some optimism, which is not necessarily wishful thinking and blue skies, but optimism is I can achieve good things. It's possible if I put the effort. And I think that if you just been exposed to a lot of negativity, you start to believe that this is basically the standard. And I don't think that this is something, useful to anyone.
Do you have some kind of hacks of about keeping your mind like hygiene hacks that you have on your mind about how you perceive content, how do you process content in the digital space? I have the feeling that especially now with the pandemic, we're reaching new levels of being overloaded by content, isn't it? And I think more and more about developing and focusing on competence and skills of how to deal with this kind of overload.
I think I got a question. Thank you for that. I think it's a very important one. So personally, myself, I'm spending at least 10 to 15 minutes every day on meditating. And this is not something cheesy. Meditating to me is like brushing your hair or washing your teeth. So basically, it's trying to just stop the outside world and try to garden your own mind and see what's happening inside. I mean, if we just try to stand still for a few minutes and just see what type of thoughts are coming into our head, maybe we can recognize which are our biggest challenges, which are our biggest addictions of various types. And addictions, I don't mean necessarily drug abuse or substance abuse. I mean, what we are craving for, what is driving us in a nurturing or negative direction. And I believe it's a very important mind hygiene. If more people spend just a little bit of time, not hours on meditation, or just focus on your own mind and looking into your own self and being a bit more reflective, I think this is very important. So you get the driver's seat of your mind flow. And as you said, your mind flow is very distracted right now. There are a lot of factors for that. Also, I try to speak and communicate purposefully to a huge extent. I prefer not to waste too much time small talking and things like that, just because this is draining your communication capacity. Of course, I like dirty jokes and things like that, but this is just an exception of the rule. I typically try not to be um, overwhelming in my communication to others as well, and not distracting them. And I think that this is coming back as a boomerang to me, to be relatively well focused and not allowing a lot of distraction in my daily mind flow.
Mhm. Isn't communication part of being a leader and also a manager? I remember at some point I heard something like being a CEO is more like being a CRO, a chief repetition officer, because you repeat the same messages again and again, especially about mission, vision, where we're going to, how are we going to do stuff, principles, values.
Yeah, so I'll use another interesting, popular fact in the recent years, that communication is to a huge extent nonverbal. So I'm not sure the exact percentage. Let's say it was 24. Is actually coming from the words you're saying, and a huge extent is coming from, let's say, your body language and tone of voice, right? So if you can take this analogy further, it's not just what you say that is your communication. I think that the things you do and the way you do the things you do, and even the way you say the things you say, is delivering a lot of messages. And there are subtle messages, but sometimes their effect is much more, powerful and much more impactful than just the words that you say as a very direct set of words.
I get it. So we're coming back to the concept of leading by example. And in this context, I had another question, which is, it's interesting for me personally as someone who is currently, learning maybe managing others and myself and leading others. There are sides in our personality that sometimes don't really fit into the concept of being the good leader. And we don't always manage to deal with them just because we recognize them, just because we become aware of them. In this sense, when you lead by example and you're also aware of your deficiencies as a person, what is your recipe? How do you practice accepting yourself, improving yourself, especially in the context of you being the leader in an organization?
Yeah, it's a great question. It's a very deep question, at least the way I perceive it, because I've been struggling with this myself for some time. And maybe even right now. But I think that I've taken this under control to a huge extent. So I think that the best way to accept ourselves with our flaws is by accepting the flaws of others as well. And understanding that we don't need to be perfect to create something good and something purposeful and something meaningful. And it's part of human nature to accept the flaws of others. This doesn't mean to encourage them or to admire them, but just to understand that each one of us is working on his individual evolutionary path, including the evolution of our mindset, consciousness, however we call it. So allowing others to be imperfect and even showing your imperfections sometimes is actually, I think, a positive practice. Especially if you demonstrate that you have the desire to change and you're putting the effort to change in a positive direction, which is a never-ending process anyway. So accepting yourself and accepting others and still being happy about the things that you're doing and focusing on your positives and doubling down on your strengths. I think that this is inspiring, and I've been listening myself and analyzing myself while listening to various types of motivational speakers, no matter if they're professional motivational speakers or just people who happen to motivate others. And I think that one of the most powerful techniques they have, either intentionally or unintentionally, is to admit some of their flaws and still show that they can be a valuable person and they can produce something good. And I think that this is the really empowering message, because all of us have our flaws and we're typically paralyzed by that. And when you show that you can have flaws but still progress and achieve great things, then others get encouraged. And when they get encouraged, it becomes much easier to use this energy and to recycle part of this energy, or to recur some of this energy into advancing their own level of general perception, of general consciousness. And this on itself, recursively, is improving all their qualities and negating some of their traits.
Thank you for this answer. I think it was very important to stress exactly on this, acceptance and growing as a person while being a leader, and not being paralyzed by the scrutiny that you at some point you feel on a daily business. I remember I was having also some days when I wasn't feeling at my best.
Mm-hmm.
And I would just prefer to stay home because I didn't want my colleagues to see me like that. Because I knew that if they see me like that, they would feel like there is something wrong, or, there is not. I think this is like a huge responsibility that maybe for me, especially in the beginning, it was a huge bite.
Did you feel guilty or ashamed?
Mostly guilty. That is my thing. I tend to feel guilty very easy and almost all the time.
Okay.
And I would also feel guilty that I'm not working hard enough and that I'm not doing enough for the organization. And sometimes you would just need to switch off.
And if you're just as passionate about innovation as we are, hit subscribe for the Recursive podcast on YouTube or your favorite podcast platform. We're everywhere.
Something that I've got from sport, because you also mentioned this, jokingly in the beginning, but I typically use sport as a tool to do analysis of myself and others and behavior and society as well, outside of the typical business and societal context. So in sport, it's important to take some time and rest and relax. And also sometimes when you're training, you got the feeling that you're not getting it and that you're terrible at what you're just training, because it's typically a new material or something that you've been struggling with, even if it's not a new material or new type of concepts or techniques. And then funny enough, you go on your next training session the next day or a few days later, and actually you've been internalizing, and you've been getting better at the things that you were thinking you're sucking at 2 days earlier. So it means that our perception of how well we are doing is very time limited, and it's a timestamp of just how we are performing in this particular moment. Mm-hmm. But there's a long-term effect and progress of doing things and not achieving the results that you want right now. So this is encouraging me. I'm not having the scientific or psychological explanation about that, but just very empirically and very experiment-based. This is giving me the courage that sometimes when I suck at doing something, this doesn't mean that 2 days later, even without doing consciously anything about it, I'll be much better at it.
Do you somehow measure it, or do you journal? How do you measure, or how do you make the progress visible to yourself?
Mm-hmm.
Because it's only that.
Yeah, I think that I have just a few topics that are of key importance to me, and I'm very conscious and aware about them almost all the time. So when they change, I spot it, definitely. I'm not having a specific tool to track my progress into anything, to be honest, right now. It's just maybe I have, as I said, a set of a few burning questions, and I'm very hardly getting into solving them, and I can very clearly say if I'm improving there or not. But I have this, this buffer, this safety zone where I'm understanding that some of them I might not perceive as progressing today, but I'll be maybe better tomorrow, just after I sleep. Or if I meditate about something and then suddenly an answer is popping up. So I'm leaving it to the flow, to say so, for a lot of things, but I'm pushing when I can. And it's important I think, to have this distinction when you can actually have an impact and when you can't. And if I can have an impact on something, I'm pushing. If I feel that I don't have an impact, I'm just leaving it to the, the situation or the flow of events to fix it.
Okay. Okay. This definitely, minimizes the feeling of guilt when you're not succeeding
I still
at
have it.
something. Yeah, you still have it.
Yeah, but
Okay.
it's not driving me on a daily basis.
Okay.
hmm
From what you and from what you say and what you share, what I also know about you and what is also visible, I would say that you're leading a very healthy lifestyle. Would you say that you developed this before being an entrepreneur or after that? And was entrepreneurship that led you into believing that you need to take care of your body?
I think this went in parallel, sometimes in huge discrepancies. I remember when I was bootstrapping the company, I went totally out of shape. I see some stories of myself or just like a social media posts from like 7, 8 years ago, and I look terrible. Honestly, I mean, just because I was so focused on this constant push, and feeling of guilt when I'm not achieving the things that I want to achieve today, and I could barely, went to bed and sleep before 5, 6 a.m. in the morning, because especially during the period when I was working into a different company, so I can support myself financially and spending all the rest of my time for working, I was working very late on these startup companies. So I didn't have the energy, the enthusiasm to dedicate some time to sports. When your sleep and your physical activity is at a poor level, your eating is very badly affected. You start to eat a lot of sugary foods and you just want to compensate for the energy. Also, it's some kind of how to say this, the calming down effect of eating, which I think is related with your connection with your mother, because this is how you start life, eating and drinking milk and so on. And there are a lot of psychological aspects of eating. So I was basically abusing food and sugary foods for some time.
What made you change your habits then?
Well, part of this realization that you need to sometimes step a little bit back and just understand where you can have impact and where you can't have impact. So we're not pushing all the time. Now, in sports as well, you have situations where you just, weather the storm for a while and then you explode when it's the right timing. I'm not having a particular single pointed answer to that. I think it's just trying to develop more and more my awareness about how I function, how I myself am driven, what is driving me, what is putting me back. I started to develop understanding that actually food is not a substitute for quality energy and quality life. And I started to build a discipline to spend some time on sports. And life seems sometimes like a very hard thing and a very easy thing at the same time. And I think the reason for that is that you have this spiral and recursive, and I'm not using this just to be flattering you, but it's a recursive effect of the direction that you're taking. So if you go into a certain direction, things start to get easier and easier to stay there. You have this spiral. And it might be an upward or a downwind spiral. So the good thing I think about life is whatever direction you choose, it starts reinforcing itself. So no matter how high or low you are, you always have the possibility to go the other direction. So when you're very low, you still always, in every single moment, you have the ability to start going upwards. And there will be an echo effect and a magnification effect where basically things are starting to support you to go in this direction. Of course, there initial resistance, but I mean, both to good and bad things, we have resistance. But once you're able to walk a little bit around the situation, then you're rising to the next level, or you're falling to the next level down. And I think this is a good thing. We have the ability, once start something, to achieve either highs or lows that are beyond our imagination at the moment when we're starting doing them. This might be scary or a very opportunistic and very positive, depending on the direction that you choose.
Thank you for saying this. I also enjoy, or I wouldn't say enjoy, but it's a trick that I'm using, taking the snapshots, especially when I fail or when I have the feeling that I'm not at where I would like to be. I always say to myself, okay, this is ground zero. And from here, it's actually the perfect situation, because from here I can try every day a new way or a new thing, which would eventually make me better. And if it doesn't, I'm still at zero. I mean, I don't even believe that much in the spiral down. This is a way too frustrating, but the ground zero. When I imagine myself here, I actually feel myself in a very beneficial situation.
Yeah, I think it's a good trick, and it's not actually a trick. I mean, it's a good strategy and a good tactic to handle frustration as well. I think that it's a very philosophical line of thinking, but I think that as we grow older, we start maybe to get a bit clearer perspective on what life is all about, or at least what our individual, personal, own life is all about. And the closer you are to this perception and understanding, the more fulfilled you feel. The distant you are, the more frustrated you are, no matter what's happening. I mean, you can be very successful and still feel huge deficiencies in your life. Or you might be, to someone else's perspective, from someone else's perspective, to be quite mediocre in the things that you're doing, but you can feel, very blissful. So as much as you can connect to your own internal sparkle and drive about what is driving you and what is defining you as a person, and of course this is something that changes over time, the more fulfilled you feel in the things that you're doing. Of course, competition has been very deeply shoved into our perception about reality and success, and we compare ourselves all the time with others. And this is a huge lack of happiness. Preventing us from feeling happy, because we compete with each other in our minds. And I think that this is a very draining exercise. I personally myself am fighting with this sometimes, how to compare to other entrepreneurs, to other leaders, to other teachers. And still I'm getting better and better into being a person of my own and being happy with who I am. And I think then this is giving me the foundation to do really things that are impactful and that are unique, because I don't want anymore to compare myself to others and to just, making the comparison on some kind of metrics that somebody else has defined.
But isn't that opposite to the general belief that we have in business that competition is good? Some weeks ago, we were talking to, I was talking to Miroslav from Office R&D, and he was mentioning an aspect which is very close to what you're referring to. It was the aspect of winning at all cost. Taking, examples like Djokovic or Nadal from tennis, where you're so driven by really winning that you just don't give up. So in this sense, competition and trying to be better than the others, isn't it making you a better entrepreneur, business person?
Yes and no. Okay. So as I said a bit earlier, as I shared a bit earlier, there are low aspects and high aspects, I think, of the same quality or of the same drive. So I think that the younger you are into something, the more the ego-driven, competition-based approaches are actually working well for you. And they're needed. They're like the kick in the ass to, just kickstart the whole thing. And that's important. But at the same time, I think that Simon Sinek, which is a very favorite motivational speaker of mine, his book Infinite Game is all about this topic. And it is, you can win only into something that is finite. So if you can compare it, if you can measure it, then this means that this is finite. And there are a lot of other things going on in the complexity of the human life, but also in the business, of the complexity of a business and what kind of mission it has, and even what kind of financial results it has at the bottom line is still a very complex thing. And if you start competing, the catch in competing is that you can choose the wrong track to compete at. We are always, when you have in your mind, how do I compare to somebody, you're always picking one metric. And it's not necessarily certain that this is the right metric that your business is all about. And I believe that there's enough resources for everybody, and they're getting more and more. And one example, a very popular one, is the internet, and all the opportunities that internet is creating for everybody. So the actual backbone of the internet infrastructure is made of sand. You have enough sand. The optical fiber cable is glass, which is byproduct of sand. So just sand, you're making trillions of commerce on sand. And what's my point with that? The more we collaborate on creating things and creating value and goods and utilizing things in the most optimal way, the more and more opportunities are created. And if we compete, we're just looking at a very small, limited set of resources, and we're thinking, how can I get more of this, one way or another? I mean, is it investor attention if it's in terms of startups? Is it customer base if it's in terms of startups competing with each other for the customer, or companies competing each other? And typically, you can create much better things and much more valuable things if you're not competing with others on the current snapshot of situation of resource availability in the world. It's a complex sentence, but I mean that if we compete, we are always fixed in the past, because what we are competing for is something that has been defined in the past. And the future has a lot more opportunities and a lot more tracks that we can run on without necessarily having to clash each other into competition.
I like this idea. I like this imagination. I can totally agree to the fact that sometimes ego can distract us from who we really are and who are we meant to be and what is really our goal in life. I can also relate to the idea that, but I think this is something that you develop really over age, or with age, where the closer you are to who you are and who you're supposed to be, the happier you feel. It's something which comes from intuition. I cannot even explain it.
That's correct. Yeah, the way I
at
feel
some
it too.
point, you feel like you're not driven by the waves, and the sea is not just clashing you here and there, but you're actually riding the waves. And that happened to me also some years ago. So I can only relate it to age. And when we speak about age, there is also something else that I wanted to ask you about. And this is your role at the university. Your alma mater, Sofia University. So you mentioned that you were mastering in technology entrepreneurship, and now you went back to teach to others. In this sense, what is the legacy of your generation? I mean, you were one of the pioneers when it comes to technology entrepreneurship in Bulgaria, I would say. And you started working on your ideas at different times. Now the ecosystem has evolved, has matured, and you're preparing the next generation of entrepreneurs. What do you give them? What is your legacy, and where do you see it going in the future? Looking at their eyes now, yeah.
Well, so I've always been a little bit more I would say this, coherent and fluid, and not necessarily separating generations from each other. So I had to think a bit harder if I need to do it that way and segment a little bit more. But I can tell our generation, we're actually the first set of entrepreneurs in Bulgaria, in the sense of technology entrepreneurship that is driven by the venture community. And we, as a matter of fact and chronology, we are the first company approved by Launch Hub Ventures for its investment. I mean, we got the investment a bit later because of some legal issues that we had with our previous investors, but we were, I think, one of the very first deals negotiated in the local startup ecosystems, with the exception of the deals of Nevek, which was the very first IT-oriented venture capital fund. So To be honest, our investors were learning along with us along the way what it is to be an investor. But that's perfectly fine and that's perfectly normal. We learn how to be better entrepreneurs. They learn how to be better investors. And if this was not the case, I would be worried because this would mean that they haven't progressed. So I think something that the fellow startup founders from this generation, which was about 2012, and myself and my co-founders included, we were very focused on building technology products, and this is something that has been for some time almost like a taboo for investors. They want to be as fast to the market as possible and to build the next pizza delivery app, as the proverbial saying says. Why we decided, companies like Storepool, like Coherent Labs, like ourselves, we wanted to build something that we believe we have the best capabilities to do. And this is core tech products, technology products. And this is to a certain extent related with the fact that sales skills are not very well developed in the region. But this is very natural just because we didn't have free trade and free economy just some decades ago. So you don't have the legacy to building like capitalistic type of sales.
True.
Still, I think that this is also good because this means that the local ecosystem might have more deep tech startups. And this is a favorite topic of mine because you don't need a lot of sales skills in the beginning for deep tech. You just need to very well understand the technology. Of course, something that you don't need to be focused a lot on the technology for its own sake. It should be solving a problem. But you don't necessarily need to be very good at massive scale sales. But it's more on a side note.
We can go back to this topic. I find it very interesting.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Let's go back to it a bit later. So I think the current generation they're very very optimistic and they don't have a lot of the limitations that my generation did. I mean, just as a post-socialistic country, and then feeling a bit strange about being part of Eastern Europe and how people are perceiving that. Currently, we have a lot of success stories from Central and Eastern Europe, from Eastern Europe, and entrepreneurs got excited. Something that I see is that still some of the entrepreneurial community is getting excited about entrepreneurship for its own sake, because it's cool, because it's modern, because the Recursive will write an article about you or invite you to a podcast or something. And as I said, this is part of the motivation for entrepreneurship. All of us has it. Something that I would like to see more, and I'm trying to contribute to, is to having the guts and having the courage to solve hard problems. I want to see more of that. And that's why, again, in my mind, I related it to deep tech. And to build things that actually are delivering some value to somebody. I'm trying to push more and more into the direction of don't think how I'm going to make a lot of money. Think how I can do something that's so valuable to somebody that's a natural effect I'll get a lot of money. And also, even if you talk about marketing, my creed about marketing is not let's find the most efficient and tricky way how to get to a lot of people at a low cost. My approach to marketing is I believe that the things, or our team believe that the things that we are doing have an immense value. It's our responsibility to make the world know about this value so they can benefit out of it.
Oh, I love this perspective.
And this is, I think this is a completely different perspective with the same or even exceeding results in terms of that. Because people relate to, no matter, everybody, no matter if it's a convicted felon or something, everybody do the things that they want to do because they have some positive motivation. It might be in their twisted mind that it's a very terrible thing that they're doing, but at the end of the day, they want to be happy and to feel better. And if you're doing something that where you demonstrate that you're concerned about others' people's well-being and happiness, this automatically relates to them. And I think as well, we all have our own internal intuition and gut feeling, and we can very well tell if somebody is lying to us. So you need to focus in your mind about how you can deliver well-being to others, no matter if it's in a business, consumer context, whatever, it's a B2B, B2C, B2G, whatever business model. If you really are focused on delivering more well-being to those entities and being sincere about it, I think that people feel it. And they have the desire and the internal desire. And we see a lot of that with Kelvin Health to help you, even without any direct transactional benefits out of helping you.
You mentioned that the entrepreneurs of the so-called next generation, those who are, coming after us, let's put it like that, they will be developing with probably less limitations that we were facing when we were starting our companies. And in this sense, if we look at, at the whole ecosystem, because you started talking about it, would you say that the ecosystem here in Bulgaria and Southeast Europe now, because I see a lot of, happening also between the countries, we are developing as a region more and more. Would you say that these ecosystems are maturing fast enough?
Compared to what?
To what you imagined when you started being an entrepreneur?
It's hard for me to give like a quantitative measure of speed, to be honest. I think the good thing is that those investors and the whole ecosystem is starting to picking things up and to understanding more and more about the whole dynamics of venture capital and also of entrepreneurship. In the recent maybe 2-3 years, we see a lot of development and movement, including some quite big financing rounds, which is some kind of proxy for success. So a very positive thing is that I think the local investors started to understand better and better how to sell the companies to the next level and the next round of investing. This is very important. This is also a kind of sales skills. How you as an investor are selling sometimes implicitly or oftentimes implicitly your company to the next investor. This is important because basically you need to generate demand for follow-on rounds, something that has been missing a lot in the region. And we're seeing more and more positive examples. So I'm kind of bullish about the development of the local ecosystem. Me personally have interest in developing some kind of investment activities in the deep tech space after some time.
Okay.
Because I see the potential for that.
Do you think that Bulgarian companies and startups are still limited somehow by the geography when it comes to attracting the next round, like Series A, Series B, or do you see it in the near future also happening here?
So, my perception about investors, mostly investors are low to mid risk bankers who wants to be entrepreneurs.
So I think I'm going to quote you at some point.
Yeah.
I like this definition.
So, investors want to have high returns and maximize the upsides, and that's normal. Every business wants to have a huge return of investment. At the same time, they try to mitigate the risk as much as possible and minimize the downsides. I personally see this oxymoronic because you cannot optimize a function to both maximize the upside and minimize the downside. I think that this leads to a certain extent to mediocre results. So I think that you need to be a bit bolder in some areas of investing. To optimize something to both maximize the upside and minimize the downside, it's almost impossible. It's oxymoronic to me, and it leads to some kind of averaging and kind of mediocre results. And one of the things that I think the community is missing that way is the so-called black swans, the companies that are going to have unexpectedly high returns. Like they look like some crazy nerds, but basically they can generate something that can have 1,000 to 10,000x returns. And it's a well-known fact that typically the portfolio of an investor is returned by a single company. It's not 1 out of 10, or it's not exactly 1 out of 10. Typically, the biggest company in terms of exit in an investor portfolio is bigger than all the accumulative valuations of the other companies.
And in which verticals would you say are such black swans in the region most probably coming from?
So I don't think that we yet have significant black swans. I think most of the businesses that has been developed well here are relatively predictable type of businesses, and they've been well managed.
Except for UiPath, of course.
So I'm talking about the companies who has already exited.
Okay.
About the companies that are currently being developed, I think that in the region, these are the companies where the strengths of the regions are. And this is the most natural thing, if you think. So I think these will be companies who are developing technology that can be very impactful and very generating a lot of traction. And of course, the entrepreneurs need to catch up a bit about how to better deliver the value proposition of the technology products that are building. This is what is missing.
I'm thinking now that my question is actually kind of stupid, because how would you predict black swans and how would you predict, outliers? This is the specific thing about black swans.
That's the strategy of investment.
Thank you, Georgi. Thank you for this honest conversation.
It was a huge pleasure.
I felt connected in so many ways.
Likewise.
I see that you're probably also one of the few leaders who work on their empathy and intuition.
Yeah, I'm very introverted.
And this is something that I would like to underline more and more in the examples and the paragons that we're putting somewhere there on the screens and in the media. I think we talk way too little about it, and we look quite often up to some kind of high-functioning sociopaths.
That's correct.
I can definitely say that you're not one of them. Thank you for being here with us.
It was really a very pleasant experience to me, and I love talking. I love talking about philosophical things, so we could spend easily like 5 more hours.
Treat is on me.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you to the whole team.
Tune in next week for a very special episode of the Recursive podcast. Irina welcomes the serial entrepreneur, motivational speaker, and author, Peter Sage.
So if you take a leader such as Saddam Hussein, Adolf Hitler, they had the same leadership qualities and ability to influence the masses as somebody like Mahatma Gandhi or Martin Luther King. Yeah, same leadership qualities, but very different ways of being able to apply that. One was self-serving, how can I get? The others was, how can we make a difference and contribute to the greater good? Ethnocentric and egocentric are 2 very different styles of leadership, even though the qualities behind them may be the same. It's very similar to saying, the difference between manipulating somebody versus influencing them is exactly the same skill sets. The only difference is the intent. Is the intent to contribute and add value, or is the intent to manipulate and get what it is that I want for me?
And if you are just as passionate about innovation as we are, hit subscribe for the Recursive podcast on YouTube or your favorite podcast platform. We're everywhere.